It's the most wonderful time of year when we get to see everyone's lists of their favorite books that they read this year. I actually had a really good reading year. It was actually really difficult to narrow down which books were my favorites because I read so many good ones this year. That's a really nice feeling to have. I don't think I've ever had that feeling in the past years. I don't think I've read as many good books as I did this year, and I'm so thankful for it, especially because everything else just kind of went insane this year. At least my reading was on point. I definitely explored a bit more than usual and made a lot of discoveries in terms of genre and finding things that I like in different genres. I normally stick to just fantasy all the time, but this year I was much more inquisitive and I found some things that really work for me in other genres, and I'm very excited about it. It honestly just opened up a whole new world of material for me to dive into. Even though I really don't need to be adding books to my TBR, I'm still excited for it. But before we get into all of the new genres, I found a new favorite in one of my classic staples, fantasy, of course, and that's the Daevabad Trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book, The City of Brass, and I love this trilogy so much. I binged it in the summer and I was screaming about it for literally so many videos. It's so good. It's one of my new favorites. This is about a con artist named Nari who is working in Cairo when she accidentally summons a Jinn warrior and she gets swept away to the magical world of the Jinn, and so much goes down. It's so intense. There are twists and turns and characters that you fall in love with and get fully attached to, even though they are very flawed humans, and there are schemes, political schemes, and backstabbing, and it's so good. There are a lot of intricacies in the character dynamics and how it all ties into the plot, and I really enjoyed it. It transported me to another world and I loved it so much. The writing is beautiful, the characters are so well developed, and the plot has so much depth that it just makes for a wonderful trilogy. If you haven't picked it up, I would highly recommend it. It's so good. I also have a new favorite manga with Lofty Flower Fall for Me by Ayano Natsume. This is an adorable rom-com. It's set in high school where the prince of the school is trying to make a specific girl fall for him, but that girl has prince-like qualities as well, and he's starting to wonder if he's just falling for her instead. It's so funny and so sweet. The characters in the friend group are adorable, and I just love seeing their shenanigans. It's so just fuzzy and warm and cute. It's exactly the kind of rom-com humor that I really enjoy, and I just fell in love with this manga as I was reading it. It's so much fun and so sweet, and it's available on the Crunchyroll manga app. So if you have a Crunchyroll subscription, you have access to this manga, and I would definitely recommend checking it out because it's just such a fun time. So as I was saying before, this year I stepped into a lot of different genres that I hadn't read previously. The first one being romance, specifically historical romance. I fell in love with historical romance this year, and it's been so much fun. The first series that I read, and still my favorite so far, is the Brothers Sinister series by Courtney Milan. These are just so good. Courtney Milan is an amazing author. The way that she writes her characters and character dynamics is so engaging and unique, and it makes for such interesting love stories. She does a really good job of immersing you in the historical setting while still keeping her characters relatable to modern times, and her plots are never lacking in depth. Yes, they are romances at the end of the day. They're going to be a little bit light and fluffy, but they never are just that. There's always a little bit of a deeper layer and some really important theming throughout all of these books. It's never overpowering, and the romance still is the main focus of the story, but if you're someone who really enjoys just a well-written story that you can get attached to the characters and fall in love with them and their romance, but you also want a little bit of something else on the side and a little bit more interaction with the historical setting, then I would definitely recommend Courtney Milan's books. They're so easy to fall into, even if you're not a romance reader, which I technically wasn't at the time, and now I am. They converted me, honestly. So because of those books, I ended up picking up a lot more Regency historical romances, and one thing that I kept noticing in many of them were mentions of Jane Austen. I had never read Jane Austen before, but realizing that she wrote in the actual time period that all of these historical romances were set in was very intriguing. So I decided to pick up Pride and Prejudice, and I absolutely loved it. I was not expecting to, because I had always thought Jane Austen was for like stuffy old people, and it's a classic, so obviously it can't be any good. I never realized that Jane Austen was so witty and clever. I just thought that anyone who was writing books back in old times was probably just super serious about it. I was wrong. This book was so much fun, and her narration was just so endearing and sarcastic, and I really enjoyed it. I ended up reading Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen later on in the year, and I really enjoyed that as well. So I have been opened up to the world of Jane Austen. I know there are not that many books that she wrote, but I do plan to read all of them because I now realize what an amazing author she is, and honestly, it shouldn't have taken me this long considering everyone talks about Jane Austen, and she survived for this long for a reason. I just need to be a little bit more open-minded, I think, but I'm very glad that I tried Jane Austen. It ended up being so much more of a success than I thought it would be. This year I also started getting into nonfiction for the first time, so I have 2 new nonfiction favorites, which is very surprising for me considering I was not reading any nonfiction at all last year. I think realizing that I could read nonfiction books as audiobooks and make it sort of seem like a podcast is what really changed my mind on nonfiction. I had never really wanted to pick up nonfiction physically. I still kind of don't. I don't think that's going to be my preferred medium for reading nonfiction. I have really been enjoying them as audiobooks though. So my first nonfiction favorite is Eloquent Rage by Brittney Cooper. This is about Black feminism and this woman's sort of journey discovering her version of feminism and how it relates to her intersectionality. It's so good. I had never read anything about feminism before. I considered myself a feminist, but I had never done any actual research on it. So this was really informative for me, as well as just being really interesting from this Black perspective. I had, again, because I wasn't familiar with feminism in general, I had obviously never seen POC feminism. And as a POC person, it was just fascinating to see. It was very informative in a lot of cases that I just wasn't familiar with, and yet there were parts that were very relatable to me because I had experienced something similar in my life, and it was a really interesting experience reading it and seeing how this woman kind of works through all of these thoughts that I was just not smart enough to figure out on my own, which is obviously why you read books and learn more about different things. So I'm really grateful for it, and I'm grateful that it's starting me on this journey to discovering my own version of feminism. Another new favorite nonfiction that is helping me grow is How to Be Yourself by Hendriksen. This is about social anxiety and all of the different ways that it can manifest and some different strategies for combating it. I definitely deal with social anxiety, and so reading this book was really informative and really inspiring. This is full of information and advice, and yet it's not dry to read at all. It's actually very engaging. You get to see different examples of people who have gone through similar things and how they've sort of grown and developed. And not only is that helpful for figuring out how to deal with social anxiety as you've seen someone else do it, it's also really helpful to figure out exactly how your type of social anxiety manifests. I found that when I was reading it and there were definitions for different ways that social anxiety can manifest, I wasn't really able to identify which parts of it applied to me particularly until we got to the examples part. So all of these stories about the clients, that's when I was able to figure out, oh, that part of social anxiety is what I have. Or that part is not what I have, I don't have to worry about that little section of it. It was really informative and also just really helpful, both in identifying what exactly my issues were and also figuring out strategies to sort of pinpoint exactly what I need to work on. This book was really helpful to me because I deal with social anxiety, so if you also deal with social anxiety, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's a really fantastic resource. So those are a few of my top favorite books from 2020. I obviously read a lot more that I really enjoyed, but these are the ones that I decided were just a little bit above the rest. If you've read any of these books, I would love to talk about them with you, and if not, I hope I've convinced you to pick them up. I would also really love to know what your favorite book of 2020 was. But that's it for now, and I will see you later. Bye.